You know, we're constantly bombarded with news from the national stage, presidential debates, what's happening in Congress, Supreme Court decisions, big stuff.
Right, the headlines.
But think about what really shapes your day to day. It's often decisions made, well, much closer to home. The condition of your local roads, maybe the quality of your drinking water.
And things like education costs, like that tuition bill you might be looking at.
hmm
State and local governments handle so much of that.
That's spot on.
Mhm.
While their national conversation is important, yeah, the fundamental things in our lives are deeply influenced by state and local governments.
Yeah.
They're the closest levels to the people, right?
Exactly. They enact policies with immediate, tangible effects on our communities.
Which brings us right to today's deep dive, state and local government in the U.S. We're drawing from a chapter focused on this subject, giving us a solid foundation.
And our mission for you, the learner, is pretty straightforward. We want to unpack the essentials of state and local power, where it comes from, how it's transformed over time.
And the really different political landscapes you see across the states, it's quite varied.
Definitely. We'll also look at the key players, governors, state legislators, and the basic structures of local governments, counties, cities.
Think of this as your express route to understanding the systems operating right in your backyard.
And if you're aiming to get that knowledge quickly but thoroughly, understand the different ways states work, and maybe have a few aha moments about your own community.
You're in the right place. And don't worry, we'll keep the jargon to a minimum. Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. Where do these state and local governments actually get their authority?
That's the crucial first question.
hmm
If we look back, way back to the Articles of Confederation, our first government,
Right.
the power was overwhelmingly with the states. The national government was, well, designed to be weak. No strong executive, no real federal court system,
The main concern was preventing any one state from getting too powerful.
pretty much, and preventing a strong central government like the one they just fought against. Amending the Articles needed unanimous consent from all 13 states. Think about that.
Wow, unanimous.
And each state, big or small, just got one vote in Congress.
So the balance was really among the states, maybe not between the states and a national government. What were the downsides?
Precisely. And it didn't take long for the weaknesses to show. The National Congress just couldn't do basic things like compel states to pay their share of the Revolutionary War debt.
Right, the debt was a huge problem.
And states could block things like national tariffs if it hurt their own financial interests. It just wasn't working
Wow.
effectively.
So that paralysis, that weakness, is what led to the Constitutional Convention, a sense that something fundamental had to change.
Exactly. The founders realized they needed a new blueprint. This led to our current system, federalism, a sharing of power between the national and state governments.
And the Constitution definitely beefed up the federal side.
Oh, significantly. They created the executive branch with the president, the judicial branch with the Supreme Court, a much stronger central structure.
And we talk about express powers. Those are the ones written down, right?
Yes, Article 1, Section 8 for Congress, Article 2 for the president, spelled out. But there are also implied powers.
The necessary and proper clause, the elastic clause.
That's the one, Article 1, Section 8 again. And it's been, well, quite elastic. It's been the basis for federal action in areas not explicitly mentioned.
Like, where has that clause really stretched federal power?
Think about healthcare debates. Federal taxation beyond what was originally listed, regulating interstate commerce. That last one is huge.
Interstate commerce, right?
The interpretation of what constitutes interstate commerce has dramatically expanded federal reach over time. It's been controversial, for sure.
And then there's the supremacy clause, Article 6. Federal law wins if there's a conflict with state law.
Generally, yes. That establishes federal authority. But crucially, the Constitution didn't just empower the federal government. It also specifically preserved powers for the states.
Okay, so it wasn't a total federal takeover.
Not at all. States kept the power to establish local governments, counties, cities, school districts, all that. They have sovereignty over those within their borders.
And states play a role in changing the Constitution itself.
A big role. They have the power to ratify amendments proposed by Congress. That's how almost all amendments have happened, state legislatures or state conventions approving them.
State conventions? That sounds unusual.
It is. Only happened once, actually. For the 21st Amendment, repealing prohibition. All the others went through state legislatures.
And there's that other mechanism where states themselves can trigger a constitutional convention.
Right, if two-thirds of state legislatures call for one. It's never actually happened. There's been a push for it, often around things like a balanced budget amendment.
But it sounds a bit risky, an unknown convention.
That's the fear for many. What else might get proposed? What rules would it follow? It's a powerful but untested provision in the Constitution.
Okay, now what about reserved powers? The 10th Amendment.
Ah, yes, the 10th. This was really important for the anti-federalists who worried about federal overreach. It basically says, any powers the Constitution doesn't give to the federal government or deny to the states.
Are kept by the states or the people?
Exactly. It's like the default setting. If the Constitution is silent, the power likely resides with the states.
Makes sense. And then there are concurrent powers, shared responsibilities.
Yes, things both levels of government can do, like collecting taxes, income tax, corporate tax, both federal and state governments do that.
Building highways.
That's another classic example. The interstate system is a joint effort, making and enforcing laws, too. Think traffic safety helmet laws, DUI laws, texting bans, often state laws, but there could be federal influence or standards, too.
So this balance, this division of power, it hasn't stayed the same throughout history, has it?
Not at all. It's been a constant evolution, really an ebb and flow. The New Deal in the 1930s was a massive expansion of federal power.
FDR and the Great Depression.
Right. The federal government stepped in big time to try and fix the economy. The Supreme Court pushed back initially, but eventually the tide turned towards more federal intervention.
And then the Great Society in the 60s, LBJ.
Another major expansion, especially in social welfare, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, huge federal programs.
And states became partners in running these, but also dependent on federal money.
Increasingly so, yes.
Yeah.
Through federal grants, you can actually track this in spending. After about 1940, federal spending started consistently outpacing state and local combined.
And that gap's widened since 2000, especially with big events.
Definitely. The Great Depression, World War II, the Great Recession, COVID-19, you see big spikes in federal spending relative to state and local during those times.
So more federal money means more federal influence through the purse strings.
That's a major way it happens. Fiscal policy, especially categorical grants. Federal money for specific things, like highways or schools, but often with strings attached. Conditions on how it's used.
And then there are unfunded mandates. That sounds unpopular.
Oh, very. Federal requirements forcing states or localities to do something, but without providing the money to pay for it.
I can see why that would cause friction.
Huge friction. It led to the Unfunded Mandates Reform Act in 1995, trying to put some brakes on it by requiring cost estimates upfront.
Did it stop them completely?
Not entirely, no, but it aimed for more transparency. Still, despite this trend of federal influence, we've also seen pushes for more state autonomy recently.
Like what?
Well, welfare reform in 1996 gave states much more flexibility in how they ran those programs. And look at controversial areas like abortion regulations.
Big state variations there.
Exactly. Waiting periods, parental consent, things like that. Or marijuana laws, states moving ahead with medical or even recreational use, often directly contradicting federal law.
So it really is a constant negotiation, a shifting balance. Okay, let's zoom in further. What about the power within a state? Between the state and its local governments, cities, counties.
That's interesting because the U.S. Constitution is actually silent on that state-local relationship.
Really, it doesn't mention cities or counties.
Nope. Because states are mentioned, the legal principle that developed is that states hold the primary authority, independent of the feds. States then decide, through their own constitutions and laws, what powers to give to local governments.
And that leads to Dillon's rule.
Precisely. Named after Judge John Dillon back in the 19th century. His argument was essentially, state power trumps local power. Local governments are creatures of the state.
Meaning the state can create them, change them, even dissolve them?
Legally, yes.
Yeah.
They exist at the state's pleasure. Most state constitutions have supremacy clauses reinforcing this state law over local ordinances if there's a conflict.
But surely states don't run everything locally. That seems impractical.
Absolutely not. For efficiency, states grant powers to local governments through something called home rule.
Home rule, like a local charter.
Exactly. It's like a mini constitution for a city or county, outlining its powers and responsibilities, gives them some autonomy.
But conflicts can still happen, even with home rule.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
You mentioned Texas earlier. The state legislature overriding Denton's local fracking ban is a perfect example. State power ultimately won out, even though Denton had home rule. The type of home rule matters too. Some charters grant broad powers, others are more specific.
Okay, so these local governments, counties, and cities, what do they spend their money on? What are their main budget items?
A lot of the basics. Transportation, roads, bridges, maybe public transit. Public education is huge. Public safety, police, fire. And also healthcare, parks, libraries.
And where does the money come from? Not just bake sales, I assume.
No. Actually, the single largest source is usually intergovernmental transfers.
Mm-hmm.
Money from the federal and state governments. Grants.
Okay, transfers first. Then what?
Then comes the big one locally.
Yeah.
Property taxes.
Ah,
It's happened. The 2008 mortgage crisis was brutal. Property values tanked, tax revenues dried up, state aid got cut. Detroit is the most famous recent example, filing for bankruptcy in 2013.
Detroit, a major city. What were the main causes there?
It was a perfect storm, really. Massive long-term debt, huge unfunded pension and healthcare promises to city workers, combined with decades of economic decline and population loss.
So bankruptcy was a way to restructure.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
To renegotiate debts and obligations. It's been a long road back, but they're rebuilding now.
It really highlights the tough spot municipalities are in.
Definitely. They provide essential services like states do, but they're stuck within state boundaries, face limits on raising money, and they can't just pass costs up the chain like states sometimes can with the feds. They don't have that same sovereignty.
That's a key difference. Frontline services, but fewer tools.
Okay, so we've dug into the legal and financial structures. Let's shift gears a bit. What about the culture of politics in different states? Ah, yes. This gets really fascinating. Beyond the laws and budgets, how states operate is deeply shaped by the underlying beliefs and attitudes people have about government. Daniel Elazar's work here is foundational.
Elazar, he came up with 3 political cultures.
That's right, back in the 60s. Moralistic, individualistic, and traditionalistic. He argued these cultures spread across the U.S. with migration patterns.
So different groups moving west brought different ideas about government with them.
That was his theory. Different political and religious values shaping beliefs about government's role, citizen involvement, political parties, all of it.
Okay, let's break them down. Moralistic first. What defines that?
In a moralistic culture, government is seen as a positive thing, a tool to better society, promote the common good.
So people expect officials to be honest, serve the public interest.
Exactly. There's less tolerance for corruption. Politics is seen as a worthwhile endeavor, a way to solve problems collectively. Citizen participation is highly valued.
Sounds almost idealistic. What does government do in these states?
It tends to be more active, more willing to intervene to address social issues, fund public programs, promote general welfare. Think social safety nets, environmental protection.
And geographically, where did Elazar see this culture originating?
He traced it to the Puritans in New England. Then it spread westward across the upper tier of the country, Great Lakes, northern Midwest, Pacific Northwest, reinforced by Scandinavian and Northern European immigrants later on.
So New England, Minnesota, Oregon, places like that might fit this mold.
Generally, yes, according to the theory. And it fosters high voter turnout, easier registration, more competitive elections, maybe more openness to third parties. Merit is supposed to matter.
Okay, contrast that with the individualistic culture. What's the focus there?
Individualistic culture sees government more like a marketplace. It's a mechanism to address individual needs, help people pursue their own goals. More transactional.
So less about the common good and more about what's in it for me.
In a way, yes. Government provides services people demand. Officials get compensated. Policies get enacted if they meet individual needs or boost private goals. Less emphasis on broad societal improvement.
Where did this culture come from, according to Elazar?
Mid-Atlantic states, initially New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, settlers from non-Puritan England and Germany. Then it spread west through the middle belt of the country, Ohio out towards Wyoming.
And how does that translate into policy and politics?
You often see more focus on policies like tax breaks to boost the economy or individual initiative. Think business incentives, maybe like that Tulsa program, paying remote workers to move there.
Right. And citizen engagement.
Often driven by self-interest. People get involved to protect their benefits or gain influence. There might be a bit more tolerance for corruption. Politics seen less as a noble calling.
So parties are strong, loyalty matters, less focus on the individual candidate, maybe?
Tends to be, yeah. Organized parties compete for votes, less room for third parties, typically.
Okay, that's individualistic. Now, the third one, traditionalistic. What's the core idea?
Traditionalistic culture sees government's main role as maintaining the existing social order, the status quo. Power tends to be held by elites.
So politics is for the established few, not really for everyone.
That's the idea. New policies are favored if they reinforce the beliefs and interests of those already in power. Change is often resisted.
And this is strongly associated with the South.
Yes, Elazar linked it firmly to the South and its history, including the plantation economy and legacy of slavery. It spread from the Upper South down and across the Southwest.
How does that focus on hierarchy impact people outside the elite?
Well, the theory suggests that when government primarily serves the elite, those on the margins can face higher poverty, poorer health outcomes. You do see statistically higher poverty rates in the South, for example,
And political participation.
seen more as a privilege than a right or duty. Voter turnout tends to be lower. Maybe more barriers to voting, like strict photo ID laws. The intent behind those is debated. Fraud prevention versus disenfranchisement.
And party competition.
Historically, it tended to happen within the dominant party. For a long time in the South, that was the Democratic Party before the big realignment.
So three distinct cultures. But Elazar's theory isn't without critics, right? It's from the 60s.
Definitely. Major critiques. One is that it's based on old European migration patterns. What about recent immigration from Latin America, Asia? How does that fit?
Good point. People move for different reasons now, too, maybe not just following those old paths.
Right. Mobility is higher, less predictable. People move for jobs, yes, but also schools, healthcare, cost of living, escaping urban problems. Plus, the theory sometimes struggles with differences within a state. Urban versus rural can have very different political cultures.
Yeah, Texas is a good example of internal variation.
Exactly. And finally, culture itself is just hard to measure precisely. It's a useful framework, but it has limitations in explaining everything.
Still, a really interesting lens for understanding why states can feel so different politically. Okay, we've got the foundations, the culture. Let's talk about the people and institutions running the show. Governors and state legislatures.
Yeah, and it's funny, right? Public trust in Congress is often pretty low.
Dismal sometimes.
Yet state legislatures are busy passing laws all the time, making big decisions. And governors seem increasingly prominent on the national stage. Think of recent presidential contenders who were governors first.
True, it's become a real launching pad. So
Yeah.
the governor, a huge job, clearly.
Yeah.
What are their main powers and roles?
Immense responsibility. They're the state's chief spokesperson, crisis manager, head of the executive branch implementing laws, key player in the legislative process. Needs a lot of different skills.
Like Governor Whitmer in Michigan during COVID, a very visible role.
Absolutely. And governors often have, arguably, more direct leverage over their state legislature than the president has over Congress.
Really? Why is that?
Well, they're in office year-round, often the single most visible figure. State legislatures might only meet part-time, rely more on the governor's office for information, and governors often have stronger formal tools.
Stronger formal tools, like
The State of the State address is key for setting the agenda, just like the State of the Union. Proposing the executive budget is huge that shapes funding priorities.
they decide what gets funded, essentially.
They have a lot of sway, especially with surpluses, tax cuts, new programs, rainy day fund, and during cuts, especially if the legislature isn't in session, they often have broad authority. Plus, they work bills through the process meetings, media, testifying, and the veto.
The power to reject a bill, big leverage.
Huge. Overrides usually need a supermajority, which is tough to get. Just the threat of a veto is powerful.
And some governors have extra veto powers. Line item veto.
Most do, yeah.
Yeah.
Allows them to strike specific spending items from a budget bill without killing the whole thing. Some have a mandatory veto, send it back with suggested changes. A few even have a reduction veto, lower spending amounts.
And they can call the legislature back for special sessions.
Yes, for urgent issues, budget crises, redistricting, emergencies. That's another significant power, though the specifics vary by state.
So their influence goes way beyond just signing bills.
Oh, yeah. They're party leaders, fundraisers, campaigners for other candidates. They're the state's chief promoter, attracting tourism, businesses. Think about governors trying to lure companies from other states.
Right, like Texas governors reaching out to California businesses.
Exactly. Or that whole Amazon HQ2 competition. Governors lobby collectively through the National Governors Association, and they are the key responders in crises.
Hurricanes, floods, civil unrest.
Severe weather like Sandy with Governor Christie, terrorist threats, immigration issues, budget emergencies, they can call out the National Guard. That Texas freeze in 2021 was another example of the intense pressure.
Balancing acting decisively versus overreacting.
It's a tightrope. And finally, they have pardon and commutation powers for state crimes. reducing sentences, absolving guilt, like governors clearing death rows before abolition in some states.
Sounds like an incredibly powerful job, but also really challenging.
Immensely. Time constraints, loss of privacy, legislative opposition if the other party controls the chambers.
Dealing with other elected state officials, the plural executive.
Right. Officials like the Attorney General or Secretary of State who are elected separately and might have their own agendas. Plus, spending limits, those unfunded mandates we talked about, unexpected crises. It's a demanding role.
Okay, let's flip to the other side. State legislatures. What are their main jobs?
3 core functions. First, obviously, is lawmaking. Researching issues, writing bills, debating them, passing them through committees, agriculture, education, transport, etc.
Where do the ideas for laws come from?
All over. Lobbyists, examples from other states, federal policies, constituents, legislators' own interests, the governor's agenda. Passing the budget is also a critical lawmaking function, annually or every 2 years.
But most bills don't actually become law, right?
That's true. Many die in committee. And for a bill to pass, it needs approval in identical form from both the House and the Senate in most states.
Okay, lawmaking is number one. What's second?
Constituency service. Representing the people in their district.
How do they do that? Is it just voting how the district wants?
That's the delegate model acting as mouthpiece. The trustee model says legislators use their own judgment for the district's best interest. Most probably blend the two.
So helping people navigate bureaucracy, solving problems.
Exactly. Helping with state agencies, writing recommendations, maybe turning a constituents issue into a legislative proposal, also trying to bring back money for local projects, roads, grants, and showing up at local events, being visible.
Makes sense. And the third function?
Oversight, keeping an eye on the executive branch, making sure laws are implemented properly, agencies are doing their jobs.
How do they oversee hearings, investigations?
Yes, calling agency heads to testify, investigating problems often sparked by constituent complaints or lobbyist concerns, holding the executive accountable.
Now, state legislatures aren't all the same. How do they differ?
Quite a bit. Most are bicameral, House and Senate. But Nebraska is unique. Just one chamber, unicameral.
Nebraska's the odd one out.
Always. Size varies wildly, too. Alaska's tiny legislature versus New Hampshire's huge House. That affects representation ratios, how easy it is to build consensus.
Term lengths differ, too?
Yep. House members often serve 2-year terms, senators usually 4. Shorter terms might mean more focus on re-election.
What about diversity? Are legislatures representative?
Improving, but still varies a lot. Women held about 30% of seats nationwide in 2021, but it ranged hugely by state. Racial and ethnic minorities, particularly African Americans and Latinos, were generally underrepresented compared to their share of the population in 2019.
Does that diversity or lack of it actually affect policy?
Research suggests it can, yeah, both in terms of the issues prioritized and potentially in voter engagement.
And party control obviously varies hugely.
Absolutely. You see Republican trifectas, Democratic trifectas, and divided governments all across the country. That partisan makeup shapes the agenda, committee control, the likelihood of overriding a governor's veto. Different parties just have fundamentally different approaches to policy.
Finally, this idea of legislative professionalism. What's that about?
It's basically a measure of how much being a legislator is a full-time job. Key factors are salary, length of session, and staff support.
So some are full-time jobs, others more like part-time gigs.
Exactly. You've got professional legislatures like California or New York, good salaries, long sessions, lots of staff. Then citizen legislatures like New Hampshire or Wyoming, low pay, short sessions, minimal staff. Members usually have other jobs, and hybrid models in between.
Does professionalism make a difference?
It seems to. Affects who can afford to run, election competitiveness, legislator expertise, and maybe how effectively the legislature can counterbalance the governor. Citizen legislatures might bring diverse real-world experience, but maybe have less time for deep policy dives.
A real spectrum there. Okay, one specific reform that shook things up in many states. Term limits for legislators. Let's get into that.
Right, state legislative term limits. These restrict how long someone can serve, either for a lifetime or for a set number of consecutive terms. Big push for these in the 1990s.
How many states have them now?
15 currently have them for their legislators. But it's interesting, 6 states that adopted them later got rid of them.
Repealed them. Why?
often due to state Supreme Court rulings saying they were unconstitutional changes to candidate qualifications or required a constitutional amendment, not just a law.
So, not a settled issue everywhere. What are the basic types?
Consecutive limits are most common, serve for, say, 8 years. Then you have to sit out for a bit before running again for that same office. Lifetime bans mean once you've served the limit, you can never run for that office again. Oklahoma has that.
When did this wave hit?
Started in 1990, California, Colorado, Oklahoma. Big wave in 92. Last one adopted was Nebraska in 2000.
What's the main argument for term limits? Why did proponents want them?
The core idea was new blood, bringing fresh perspectives, reducing career politicians who might become entrenched or out of touch.
Less focus on staying in power forever.
Right. Maybe more motivation to make good policy quickly. Some also hoped it would increase diversity by creating more open seats for women, minorities, people from different backgrounds, foster competition, voter interest.
Sounds appealing in theory. What about the downsides? What do critics say, and what has the research actually shown?
Well, the promised big jumps in female or minority representation haven't really materialized statistically in most studies. A major concern raised is increased reliance on lobbyists.
More reliance on lobbyists. Why?
Because with higher turnover, legislators have less accumulated policy expertise and institutional memory. So they might turn more to lobbyists or executive branch staff for information.
Interesting. Any other effects?
Some research suggests term limits might weaken the legislature relative to the governor and the bureaucracy, as less experienced lawmakers might struggle with oversight. There's also the argument that you lose good, effective legislators simply because their time is up, regardless of talent. And maybe voters get less enthusiastic if their popular representative is forced out.
So, the impacts are complex, maybe not exactly what proponents originally hoped for in all cases.
Okay, we've done state level. Let's finally zoom right down to the governments closest to us, county and city.
Yeah, the ones handling services you interact with constantly. Though, ironically, voter turnout for these local elections is often the lowest.
Let's start with counties. What's their role? How are they set up?
Counties cover larger areas than cities, smaller than states. They're basically administrative arms of the state, created by the state, about 3,000 of them across the U.S.
And how are they run? Is there one model?
Three main types. Most common is the commission system. A small elected commission handles everything legislative and executive. Budgeting, passing ordinances, hiring, firing.
All rolled into one body. What else?
There's the council administrator system. Voters elect a council, which then hires a professional administrator or manager to run the daily operations. Separates policymaking from administration.
Like a city manager, but for the county, pretty much. Then there's the council-elected executive system. Voters elect both the council and a separate county executive who acts like a county-level governor, proposes budgets, can veto council actions.
What kind of officials work for the county? Usually in that county courthouse building.
Yep. You typically find the sheriff, the county clerk, handling records and elections, the assessor for property taxes, the treasurer managing funds, the coroner investigating deaths, maybe a county engineer for roads and bridges.
And what services do counties usually provide?
Roads, bridges, the courthouse itself, jails, parks, often libraries, sometimes hospitals, the basics for the area they cover. Funding comes mainly from property taxes, some sales tax, and money from the state and federal governments.
Okay, now cities or municipalities, how are they different?
They govern specific cities and towns. Way more of them than counties, over 19,000 municipalities, plus thousands of townships. Two main governing models here.
Mayor, council?
That's one. Voters elect both a mayor, executive, and a city council, legislative. But the mayor's power varies a lot. A strong mayor has significant power, veto, appointments, budget control. A weak mayor is more ceremonial, with the council holding more power.
And the other model?
Council manager. This is very common, especially in mid-sized cities. Voters elect the council and maybe a mayor who mostly presides over meetings. The council then hires a professional city manager to run the city administration day to day.
So the council focuses on policy, the manager implements it.
Exactly. It's meant to bring professional management into city government.
What do cities typically handle? What services?
A lot of essentials. Clean water, sewage, garbage collection, maintaining city facilities, parks, streetlights, maybe big venues like stadiums. Zoning and building codes are key city functions. Economic development, police, often public transit, fire protection.
And funding, similar to counties.
Similar sources, yeah. Property taxes are usually big. User fees for things like water or trash pickup, a slice of sales tax revenue, sometimes specific business taxes.
It really is fascinating how these layers fit together, providing all the services we often take for granted. It really is. And understanding this stuff, the power dynamics between federal and state, the influence of political culture, the roles of governors and legislators, the term limits debate, how your county and city work, it just gives you a much clearer picture of how your community operates.
Absolutely. It circles right back to the start. National news grabs headlines, but state and local government decisions. That's often where policy hits the pavement, affecting your daily life directly.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something for you to chew on. Think about an issue you really care about. Could be schools, the environment, local roads, whatever it is.
Hmm.
Now ask yourself, which level of government, state, county, city, maybe even a special district, has the most direct impact on that issue right where you live?
And then maybe think about how you could actually connect with that level. What are the ways to make your voice heard? Attending a meeting, contacting an official.
We definitely encourage you to check out the websites for your state and local governments. Find out who represents you, what they're working on.
Because it's in those layers, often operating quietly, that so many decisions shaping our communities get made. Understanding them is step one to being a more informed, engaged citizen.
Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.